Welcome to Writers at Sonoma, reading with Todd Melicker and myself. I'm going to introduce Todd Melicker first, and I wanted to announce that this reading will have two sign language interpreters, Blaine Gifford and Jennifer Jacobs, and we're delighted to have them here. So you'll have two languages at once coming at you. Todd Melicker, this is his first book, Rendezvous. Todd Melicker daily wanders the streets of Petaluma, gathering data as a GPS technician. He's the author of the chapbooks Day Collects, with Woodland Editions, The Immaculate Autopsy, and King and Queen. Rendezvous, his first full-length collection, was chosen by Zach Savage as the winner of the second annual Black Box Poetry Prize from Rescue Press. His work has also appeared in several journals, including Vault, Ambush Review, and New American Writing. And Aaron Shuren writes of his work, Rendezvous is a charged and beautifully uneasy meeting, ever attended by the birds in their watchfulness, voyagers between realms. Melicker's elegantly controlled lyricism carries the ache and arc of sentience of verses becoming voices in the shimmer. And I had the honor of writing a comment for this book for Todd, and so I'll just read what I wrote to also introduce him. A rendezvous is typically between two people. In one case, say, between poet and listener, the poem and the one who has come so gratefully to read Todd Melicker's long-awaited first book. A rendezvous is charged, full of potentiality and longing. Like Creeley, Melicker is a poet of rooms, of domesticity and day. In Melicker's rooms, there is great disharmony, so harmoniously clustered. When we wake in these rooms, we can ask, just what is day? What is the lyric? In the rendezvous Melicker has so importunely invited us to, fantastic moments arise, sudden as love and its psychic upheavals. This is a quote from one of his poems. The astronaut steps from his cul-de-sac of fluid oxygen. Something new seems to be going on with the abstract lyric here in the exacting music of Melicker's work, where, quote, the room is broken and we live in it. How bracing to have such a trusting guide as Melicker, since to swallow light, there is no needle like me. Please welcome Todd Melicker.
Oh my. Thank you so much, Gillian, and thank you all for coming out tonight. It's kind of amazing to be in this space. I went to Sonoma State, and my undergraduate degree is from here, and to belie how old I am, this was not here. The new Schultz Library wasn't here. We still were in Salazar, and Salazar didn't have those nice windows on the side. They had these little tiny windows, but you know, the joke was, perhaps the joke's still around, that Sonoma State started as a prison, and now it's become something else. Is that still around? Is that still one of the tales they tell? So being in this space, this is incredible. So thank you. Since Gillian was so nice to talk about this book, I should probably read from it. I'm going to start with the series that is called Nautilus, and it forms sort of a thread that sort of wraps its way around all the other poems, so I thought it would be a good place to start. Nautilus. The slow descent, that is, there he is going out white. Of course, there is another street of colors that are lovers. Between them, a series of traffic signs and the compartment for sun-stained maps. Regarding the making of air requires taking the shortest distance. An absence of quality defines the flight of the asterisks. There is a shed in the backyard, a place for shovels. Nautilus. A sky blankens and clouds she loved bluely move through her body. The sea is the largest timekeeper between them. It will provide for the location of escape among their fingers. Her hand on her hip like a rainbow. That is, wet, and like a rainbow he leans over in the shower. Leaves fill up the drain in front of the house. Today acquires Atlas. Nautilus. The astronaut steps from his cul-de-sac of fluid oxygen. Now and then, an earth peels from its shell to unfurl its tentacles. The curtains are familiar. The clock tells time. The stomach of a bell has many chambers. Meanwhile, an island's color is determined by the process in which it was cast. Their steeple and thread led a quiet life in the mountains. Nautilus. Emergence is for a slightly used morning, equal to doves, equal to the nearness of the ground, equal to pressing. She's lying in the same plane and never meeting. Day is identified by a horizon line. Then the ivy breath and zeros they poured over. Colder the galaxy begins, as does the need for parking. Cells divide cells. She knows this. Nautilus. Preocular or postocular, involute or slightly evolute. She wanted Fahrenheit and decimals to drink from, which is color on purpose. Again, there's a form of wagering that comes from lingering. He built an assurance and then the undertow. The afterburner is what steers against a decaying orbit. Nautilus. With the continents intent on their voyage, it became necessary for him to make a home in water. At this, the first signs of the archipelago appear on his back. The astronaut unfastens the rings which hold the seal on his helmet and unplugs his suit from the console. He wanders through the forest of burnt trees. Nautilus. A skin without clouds is empty. To form a word without actually, the circle drifts. Cells will divide into cells. Bowls stack neatly into each other. She's straight to the blue through a selection of recollected openings, endings. They tried to close them by themselves with, sure enough, the screen door slaps against the house. He settles the porch. So, always the trouble with books is you're going to end up reading from the title poem. So, in this case, where Rendezvous comes from is there's a book by Richard Dawkins called The Ancestor's Tale. And in that, rendezvous is his word for sort of a node where ancestors meet. So he travels sort of back from human beings to like the first cells. And so every time we meet an ancestor, that's a rendezvous. So humans to say like hominids to apes, those are all rendezvous points. But then of course, since poets are also sort of aggregators or collectors or collagists, there's other things in here too. So the poems also sort of are in two columns. And so that sort of an interaction or a weaving allows for sort of multiple voices, multiple ways of reading. And into that, I've also woven correspondences between Van Gogh and his brother, and then correspondences between me and a friend named T.M. Baird, who's also a really good poet. And then also sort of to annoy Mr. Dawkins, there's some Genesis and some Noah's Ark in here just for good measure. Rendezvous. We put ourselves on in the morning, that is, a shirt. This ark and ask of you. I have such fear of separating into the more sun, the same sun. A single result askew in the morn and the warm-blooded everything, craving for a nest. Flood world, worried, these daily tasks asking you to shed the seeds, the necessary pairs. You began sewing shut the names, show me stratum, the animal's worn mark, the color of color-crushing sunlight. Rendezvous, assembly required, the exploded view diagram and parts list. I was overwhelmed by mechanics and the living. Everything's hard to do here. It hurts in your hand while the sun crawls in my stomach. What to do now that our bodies arrive again, derived from the given up, divine, etc., covered over being by division and being given your slung song. An intentional blemish, the arc, you say, of soil, parting my hair, balancing the fingers on my fingers. Balancing the animals on my fingers. Rendezvous. When it did not come back, the land had detached from the sea. The soil coiled in a cup, a soil culled in a bowl. Why, you say, and why the color is delicate here. The best we can make are a series of preparations. Yes, the indelible X, but does it still and singing. We take the dove bird in and out of our chests with the certainty of naming during the collection of names, in and out of our mouths. I color myself at the eyes. Sky to sky, a sun shy at sea. Rely, I'll say, the ark or cart, for daily we line and lay the shell. Quell, a seed pod. Rendezvous. We traveled with them a while. They did not recognize us, these boatmen. Slowly become a boat. In making against making, there's plenty to drown upon. First, the pronounced clinging, webbing between sea stars, fingers. More slowly become a boat, away. How could I not want, wayward, to name you more, with or without? The repetitive coming up for air, this reverse arc of the back and still being half sapient, blue in the eyelid, tremulous. Stitch in on the leg, a sun, the arms thrown back together around this found blood mark, the lost coil. Rendezvous, the seed of God in God, a crack in every roof. We lay under the upturned boat, a center is nothing, separated from water without gravity. I was told photons arrive in pairs, in arcs, sets, to be set apart as a set, then settling down in the night nest. What could we have done otherwise? Abandon, shivered and silvered, the ark to carry, this ark to place in, marry in, our mouth. Rendezvous. The trouble with being a bird is everyone knows your same song. The day as it thickens, night to the quick, a garden of quiver cuts out my gift. But is it sleep and sweet is the dun, enjoyed to you, enjoined then dawn, as song and sun will find a rind from its pith, still the broken fish and dove. So another section in this book, sort of going again with this idea of multiple readings and ways that you have different ways of interacting and maybe different voices and maybe different people. Is I have the King and Queen poems, and to sort of explain them, there is sort of one poem that's going down the page, right side up, and then there's another poem that's upside down that's going up the other direction. And so then they're sort of woven together, maybe better with the thumbs that way. The title is down here and the other one's up here, and this one's going this way and this one's going this way. Oops. So the intention was to be able to have sort of multiple readings. So I'll read a couple of them, but I'll read them in all sort of 4 iterations, so you'll hear the repetition. Queen, her crown but a cup of her hands, the divine weathering prophet just above the ankle, heaven stretching height from the neck and arms. The embrace of gentility studied the affected faces on the playing cards, her previous life as a cello. King. His incline suggests his listening, arc of an allowed back. The wishbone assembly, renewal through furniture legs, and spoken softly with a hand to place tandem living, fascia of scale, shivers. He takes care. Queen and king. Her crown but a cup of scale, shivers. He takes care of her hands, the divine tandem living, fascia, weathering prophet just above the ankle, spoken softly with a hand to place heaven stretching height from the neck and renewal through furniture legs and arms. The embrace of gentility studied, back, the wishbone assembly, the affected faces on the playing cards, her listening, arc of an allowed previous life as a cello. His incline suggests his. King and Queen. His incline suggests his previous life as a cello, listening, arc of an allowed, the affected faces on the playing cards, her back, the wishbone assembly, arms, the embrace of gentility studied, renewal through furniture legs, and heaven stretching height from the neck, and spoken softly with a hand to place weathering prophet just above the ankle, tandem living, fascia of her hands, the divine of scale, shivers. He takes care, her crown but a cup. King, certainly the perfected failure of his song, thin housing of the tongue, him, gleaning from, gleanings perhaps, he collects, then settles in, a matchbox of notes, sins. Queen, on a bird instead of an arm, there was only one and more, she says, a pair to ferry, then, what's this wing for? Life on a hinge, she says, life through a door. King and Queen. Certainly, the perfected failure, life through a door, of his song, thin, life on a hinge, she says, housing of the tongue, him. What's this wing for? Gleaning from, gleanings perhaps, she says, a pair to ferry, then he collects, then settles in. There was one and more, a matchbox of notes, sins, on a bird instead of an arm. Queen and king. On a bird instead of an arm, a matchbox of notes, sins. There was only one and more, he collects, then settles in. She says, a pair to ferry, then gleaning from, gleanings perhaps. What's this wing for? Housing of the tongue, him, life on a hinge, she says, of his song, thin, life through a door, certainly the perfected failure. And I think what I'll do is I'll close with, I've sort of a new series, which I think sort of, that's that strange thing that poets all sort of have obsessions, and I just sort of keep teasing out the same obsession. So these are sort of poems that are dealing with, say like an apocryphal story from my family. So I have a relative, we have a story that one of our relatives sat under a linden tree and decided to name himself Lindemann. And we know nothing about him before, and we only know, things that have been passed down, but we have no idea where he came from or what his name was, other than he changed his name. And so this idea of changing names and changing identities and relationships, they all sort of fit with all the other things I've been reading, don't they? So these are sort of poetic letters, correspondences. Again, I'm just doing the same things, but they're fun. So these are a series of poems that are sort of imaginings of my Lindemann relatives. Dear Mrs. Lindemann, relation is based on separation. You and I, separate as schools. Everyone's bed is made from two distinct blocks. I run the rectangle to catch the train. Kingdom come for ubiquity and eucalyptus, you said, as you were breaking the electrics down, the after-heart, the after-party ice packing, ennobling a route dependent on automatic doors, an outrigger primer, religion. Sincerely, Mr. L. Dear Mr. Lindemann, today there is an electric power line bandage. The slip of the hill conjures expectation. Why should I love a boy made entirely of gristle? The horizon, we know, is but one deceiver. You sat in your armchair all day and rumored momentum. Sincerely, Mrs. L. Dear Mrs. Lindemann, is there a purity of form or only the need for disruption? Why am I still in love with a girl with a broken nose? Why do you continue to return to your bodily resurrection in the window made of increasingly smaller squares? I want to focus light, but I'm a poor prism, a prison maker, really. There's a crown that, when crushed to powder, creates a color to smear the eyes shut. Sincerely, Mr. L. Dear Mr. Lindemann, upon the accumulation of enough thoughts, the atom acts and we are its refugees, or central centrifuges. As you say, the tension about to happen, arrested in the calm of your hand. First, do it elaborately wrong, the ounce, then the rabbit hole of nuance arrives, and I'll abandon the figure altogether. Success is a continuous destruction. Grass climbs into my clothes. It's Italian for repentance. Sincerely, Mrs. L. And I'll read two more. Dear Mrs. Lindemann, do you think there is one pure love of a person, or are we forever corrupting in our corruptible creation? I leave the door unlocked. I find myself in the square, in the circle, if not perfectly. The body has a rough geometry as if heaved, then harvested in the rock. Why does nature evoke the cover plate, and what's the body if not proportions? Where are we going so fast, so light, as restrain? Sincerely, Mr. L. Dear Mr. Lindemann, linen and lithe have the same root. I too want to love the rectangle, but need the imperfect line, the gesture of the plow. I said, I laid down and began myself a rectangle. I said, I laid down and made love another way to form a layer. A thinner blue is almost white, in part, perhaps. Sincerely, Mrs. L. Thank you all. You've been wonderful to be here. And thank you for the interpreter.
Thank you so much, Todd. That was really incredible. And I know we have time for a short Q&A after both readers have read. And it is my honor right now to introduce my colleague, my friend, and my poet, Gillian Conoley. In her just-released volume of poetry, Peace, Gillian Conoley writes, quote, "Word to hold in the mouth and swallow." In this volume, she does indeed give us language, image, and verse deeply satisfying to suck on and hold in our imaginations. By this magic, she renders us quite willing to swallow the truth she's always carefully unfolding before us. It's a form of sleight of hand, and it happens in the space opened by her surprising, yet never unearned juxtapositions, rank waterfalls, for example, and in her light-filled, graceful, open phrasing. And the problem of peace hovers over it all. Poetry's power to affect reality, to create a space where the profound transformation, that is peace, can occur, is everywhere here sought. A language in which we do not do most of the killing, end quote, even as we are brought to struggle with the limits of language. What does it mean if there is no way to say it if you haven't heard it before? As my late husband said about Gillian Conoley when he first read her work, she's the real deal. Peace is her 7th collection of poetry. She is author also of The Plot Genie, Profane Halo, Lovers in a Used World, and Tall Stranger, a finalist for the Book Critics Circle Award. She is a winner of the Jerome J. Shestek Poetry Prize, an NEA grant, and a Fund for Poetry Award. Her work is widely anthologized, most recently in the Norton Postmodern American Poetry. Her translations of Henri Michaud, Thousand Times Broken, 3 books by Henri Michaud, will be out this fall with City Lights. Founder and editor of Volt magazine, she is poet in residence here at Sonoma State University. She is our treasure. Please join me in welcoming Gillian Conoley.
I'm going to start with a poem. The title is kind of riffing off of "Oh Say, Can You See" from the Star Spangled Banner. And the title is "An O, a Sky, a Fabric, an Undertow," which also is the first line of the poem. An O, a sky, a fabric, an undertow, a blanket laid upon the grass, all the mixed faces looking out or looking in, the great paintings in yard sales and museums, abstract or representational, oils, acrylics, ink. In the poem, the evening is spread out like a media to let the windbag out of, to neutralize our eternal footman who is presidentially nimble and wears a big gold middle ring to rap us on the head with, when the sky is a slow-moving sea life, a poker tell, the solitary night finches nested deep, dead asleep in urban bamboo's tall corridors. No longer a president, only an invisible, indivisible male muse, all oscuro, dark substance, molecularly swarming in fields, in cities, like a cloud rising from sidewalks to make individual appearances, so shaded, so shrouded in oil. Whistler could have done him. Sometimes appearing in well-cut overcoat or next to a tall case clock to say, look, this was the deal made a long time ago. Can you give me a ride to the vacated cities with most hospitable ports? A couple of lonely men had plans that got shoved this way for a building we could aspire to enter. I donated, then got distracted for a building we could enter. Perhaps we shouldn't aspire, I mean, but it is good to build it now as then. I am entering the poem now, not just to notice the pronoun I, but how casually the no longer a president has used it. The sky is a sea we all committed before sinking into the most hospitable port where dust plays dark before flying invisibly into undeadly messengers done up as citizens. So it's all substance to make our children's lives better than now. A situation I would take as conduit, as altar, our groceries. There is a lot of room for metaphysics in this country. I call waiting the GPS navigational finding device, enhanced search, the overly Google mapped. Severe lack of frontier in the world, so lots of people have begun exploring the sewers, recording sounds of manhole covers as cars roll over them. Only 12 feet down, it feels like 100, and there are rubber boots called waders, but they fill up quickly and are discarded. The idea is to tramp what all gets transformed back into Earth's core. I would like to take some of that infant stardust that has fallen on your head. Why can't I be shrouded in it, if only undercurrent? I used to say my sister sold time on the radio because that's what she did. But then television leveled soundscape, the pleas of the palm tree rustle in the gelatin print, internet cresting event, manual or mental, a loose sally of the mind, all of it suggesting streams of attenuated speeches by absent friends who said, time, we're no more living in a landscape beyond end of the river valley of that particular program. Now time says it will save a working copy of the image with a slightly different name. My sister and I continue to run up and down the stairs. Now I will give her a feminine ending or an infant star fabric to unfurl. The lonely men were right to want to fold their flags back into a triangle when someone died. We could unfold and try once more to open a language in which we do not do most of the killing, a drop-in date for the ungrievable. Some will always refuse this country to come forward. We could all take off our skulls and stare into them. A static in the contours, rank waterfalls, gray-green opal stones, the alert pianist, key phrases of the Arcadians, Indo-European root rot, doo-wop, the dead recircling rocky crags where recline the born or birthing wet with their last or first words. We could take our fallen off temperate fur and begin to recite a Greek story, a groan. Now, see how fast now can go. To what does it matter? World to come, word to hold in the mouth and swallow. Untapped. What does it mean if there was no way to say it if you haven't heard it before? So we are all writing, and people say there are too many books, though it seems to be reading that refuses to die. This is the good part, the part looking at the part. Can you tell if this is the good part? You can tell if this is the good part if it is the part looking back at you, not wanting to see someone else airbrushed all over you. It is the feeling of being embodied by the person you love. or are sweet on, enchanted by. Not that they fill you, but that you are them. They've come to live inside you. You look like them. You are so them. You see through them and imagine they are looking at you, being them. So, where are you? I am still beautiful. Excuse me. Okay. And this next poem is called The Patient. I think Ann Goldman taught this poem in her class last semester, and someone asked if I meant the patient as in, to be patient, or patient as someone who is a patient in a hospital. And I said both, patient in every way that you can imagine it. I don't know if we're citizens anymore. I think we're all patients. The patient. I am patient. That is my mineral fact. I have long-term storage in double helixes, my 2 long polymers of nucleotides, my backbone made of sugars and phosphate groups joined by ester bonds. I see imagist pairs dissolving down golden arms. I hear needleless the sleep aid CD's real violins, then float blue-black at the eventide, injure of the taut to and fro, cut back asphalt road, a path of greening twigs nourishing nothing personal. Rootstocks of the best grapes, balm for the honeybee's bite, limes flee. Money chimes in the community bowl. With patience, I can sit on this bench and wait for the ironworks of a previous century to reverse themselves. Or I can lie in the grass, vision the airplane scatter-lit hallway, the descent only a little shaky, like the trouble between art and life rolling you out onto an unpainted landscape. The unbelted intoxication of travel, unstable as a chemical's twisted briar. Medicine or drug, licit or illicit, or after-image. Time to move along, it's pathos time. Dodge a supreme fear, pathos. Patience was crowding anxiety. Patience's gentle tongue was breaking a bone, while the twin and drone to be patient with hovered over our uncharted, rimless wants. Rictus, a slit vowel. La vida, a mess of dominoes, face down. I am a pilot light, desiring more recognition. I suck grass to the dead inside. The sleep aid CD and Hippocratic oath mixed up good in the cocktail of my head, spoken into like commerce's cavity. Cavity or skylight opening to the early spring blossoms in the airless baggage claim. Sanchez in stencil font, stitched to my desert fatigues. Holding luggage, looking for someone to pick me up. I can be both life-charged and dead in consecutive units, exited to like turnpike rest stops promisingly lit pagoda, a respite for the humans stopping and returning, the humans predicating. A human is someone who has wandered in from the desert. I am patience in a substance clothed. Truly a creepy troll, truly a creepy troll. A human is the one continuing to close Christ's eyes on the great crucifixes, wagering will there now be some inevitable progress. In a tone poor, the erotics of the electronics swelling the house and trailing to the sidewalk. Skip to sound, a harrowing to go, a darned patch, a soft fontanelle, a warm harm. A human does nothing unusual. Forgetting the euphoria of human potential is human potential wanting more tools to form the mind. Rest, stop. A human is go, stopping and returning. A practice. A human is someone to pick you up. A human is someone to hone in a human's long-held desire to vanish in a crowd or X'd out void of others, in mass humans estranging light. Okay, that's a heavy poem. This poem is called My Mother Moved My Architect, and I wrote it for my mother who is just turned 90. And I realized not too long ago and way too late how fortunate I was to grow up in the same house with her, because she made of the house, it was sort of like some great art installation. If you can imagine, let's see, some of you probably saw the film, is it Grey Gardens? If you mix that with Joseph Cornell boxes and maybe a little Gone with the Wind. She wasn't exactly a hoarder, but there were a lot of objects in the house and interestingly placed next to each other. And anyway, I think I realized too late that she was an artist, or is an artist. She's still alive, but she's just scaled down. She's in a retirement center still doing her thing, but on a smaller scale. So this poem is called My Mother Moved My Architect. My mother moved my architect, cutting out newspaper clippings, making the lifelong collage had I sense I would have papered the hallways with. Instead, it is an ephemeral art. A flaxen jean, her left shoulder out of its socket, will remain that way rest of days and to nights. What is mentally important? My mother moved my architect. I do not forget unworn enormous straw hats having gone up in fire. Butter churn too. A drummer drumming differently in the hallway. All years lead up the stairs. The lingerie drying on the stairwell. The gate got the girl in it. The depression was in the depression glass. The carnival plate poised in the window to seal the light said, "Look close to see your face. Look in the face of your mother, giving way to continuance, red wolfing each nasal fold, and the pearly restitch in the forehead. What happened there?" My mother made my Amazon stockings, made my word order accordion back through the binoculars, the woody tendrils of the wisteria, a delicacy on the white pickets, sharpening up, the honeybee riding on that futurity. Once my mother's face spoke. It said, "Let's tear up our birth certificates and be transubstantiated. Make of this world a planetarium, ultra-dense." What the Big Dipper said to the Little Dipper. My burial plans include a new species, but first, scatter my ashes over the grave of your father. Be sure to get the right grave. Cemetery folks will tell you this is illegal, so do it at night. Midsummer, my preference. Box turtle so still as to look dead in the middle of the lake. If one could imagine a mother between two swans, pomegranate, persimmons, shimmering trail of snail, copper nail in the earthen dank shed, the miscellany began the perplexity. This drawer is for kitchen scissors. Peel a grape for a glass eye, bleach kills mildew, toothpaste if no bleach. A kindness brought the pie. I do think at one point as a woken child, I saw Bonnie and Clyde's car, sleek and perfect. I then understood Godspeed. And if there were any morals, I would take the rose. I do not know how the coins got tossed up like that to fall where they did, nor the golden piss made sheerest, relieved from a nude. Look into your mother's face, font yourself there, forget redemption. If you want softness, wash your hair in rainwater. If you crave guidance, be Virgil to the Dante. You didn't act this way in the other pit. My mother moved my architect, bade fair, she slipped the bolt upright like the great sea chest none of us had ever seen open. My mother moved my architect, she made it pump and eat. She made this lake where I come to over-identify with the dead and call dear echo to my echo. She made me nude, sheer, and nude again. She made it interesting right up to the end. So that I have to think, what is with these two heads blurred and blended? This veil not seen back through. Tail lights, white gloves with the green stain as you entered the sunless woods. Best to keep the road a little feral where the color is, and your world part dust. Fed and unkilled, I am not through being a poet or a being. What fallen ash is the power to live? What pituitary is the grace to keep doing so? And what good is temporary measure? Did you say thank you? And were you thanking? This next poem is called Opened, and it is for Gabrielle Giffords, the United States representative who was received a gunshot wound to the head January 11, 2011. It was at a Tucson Safeway parking lot, and 6 people were killed. And there are pieces of the speech that Obama gave at a memorial service for the 6 people who were killed appear in the poem, as well as a couple of months later in March, there was the tsunami in Japan where 3 nuclear reactors melted down, and I'm sure everyone remembers what it was like to be driving around in California and hearing on the radio that a radioactive cloud was headed our way, but we weren't really supposed to worry about this. And so anyway, pieces of language from the radio media about the radioactive cloud coming in from the melted down nuclear reactors in Japan, and also from Obama's speech after Giffords was shot, both appear in the poem. And it's called Opened. So it was like sleep and waking, sleep and fraud on my visa, sleep, California waiting out radioactive plume, and today another trying card in Miami Winn-Dixie. Did they want groceries or did they want cash? Sleep. Freeway sign said take Lucky Drive to bypass bank robbery and shopping mall. So that's where the 2 bullets went through. What sphinx pushes up out the fog in the parking lot, turning each upon each our moral imaginations? If it's a gun law, this tragedy will pull through. And what was there to, and did she see? Gritty blue sink of desert night sky with her off to the side like a wonder, or your basic hospital room, sleep, a solitary male nurse, a husband. Here we pour a new layer, visible for all to see how we want to be as transparent as possible, but remain gradient, dangerous when once it was them, an error, a horror now that it is. What are we to the man who attacked the gunman as he started to reload? A constituency? Ducks in the arcade stir a glassy water, sleep, amplify. Gun with cord tied to it so no one will take it. The little girl with a hole in her chest, first girl player to play in the middle leagues. Gritty blue sunken, shame, as if the desert could hiss, fold, the 6 dead behind her eyelids. Leave them open. Let us place no more constraints on the eyes of the dead. Illegible cross-outs turned inward, searching themselves to escape like figures met in a dream. She is walking down the hall with a shopping cart. Never and always a back to the door. Whose side? Once she appears again, but they won't show her to us at her husband's launch of 4 spacewalks to install the alpha magnetic spectrometer it will take all 4 walks to sift, sleep, through cosmic rays to define the origin of the universe, though by now that plays a minor key. It could be plutonium, it could be uranium, we just don't know. A radioactive plume to drift over California Friday by noon, a shadow of cloud on the stream, crows that range and radiate from cloud to tumbling cloud. And what will she say privately, and what will she say in that language of our conviction? This tragedy will pull through, and will stand by you tomorrow. It isn't really heavily radiated water. How one eye keeps one eye on a deep and bitter thing. Okay. This poem is called Monday Morning, and it was written pretty close to right after Obama's election. Monday morning. Everything was on sale. The pop music was under the heat lamps, and the spectacle was on the television, and the television was in the spectacle. The life that is at least 3/4 automatism said to the life that isn't, just look at the great big burden of you. Quit mail, quit mail. Beyonce put a ring on it. Check it out, YouTube. Try to live as though it were morning, said Nietzsche. Can we show off the back bends in the yoga class and still progress? That is a very optimistic statement of Nietzsche's. It was morning, and all the white guilt got balled up and tossed through the sky, then landed back into the white guilt, which had made a very good deal with the white privilege. And the light through the burnt-out leaf pattern in the curtain fabric fell to the hands spread eagle on the yoga mat, pushing hard. One friend called and said, "Here we are." And I said, "Here we are." And the hand picked up the garden hose curled in the calla lilies, drips of water in the copper snout. And Giovanni called and said, "It never occurred to me there wouldn't be a black president. Why is everyone calling me to congratulate me? I didn't do a thing. I know a lot of black people with good jobs. Look, there's one," says Giovanni, with a bad cold, who was born after the Civil Rights Movement. So I point that out to her, and she says, "Yeah, right. My last cousin not in prison just went to prison." Nothing's over, so I look at my hand no longer spread on the yoga mat, same hand that slapped hands, wiped up shit, stacked money, cut the vegetables, and filled in the dot. Cinderella, Camelot. The white guilt said to the white guilt, "Don't you even try to feel better now. You still have to wake up in the morning and live as though it were morning. You can give yourself a little release, more breath, a very large exhale through the mouth. You done good, girl. You can go to the grocery store. You can look into the black faces you encounter everywhere in all the jobs, good and bad, and they look back at you a little different now. You can't say what it is. You can't describe it, but you can observe it if you can stay aware long enough. Every morning, it is the morning. You can try to live as though it were morning. The ghost wars, whispering to the ghost wars their Miranda rights. The white privilege starting the car, trying out the back seat. Knucklebone, flat palm, pinky finger wide. Here we are, here we are. Try to live as though it were morning. Light on the hands, spread eagle, breathe. And the white guilt said, hold, hold. Okay. This poem is called Occupied, and it's about the Occupy movement, obviously. There was a photograph. It's really hard to get a hand into a sports bra. This is germane to the poem. There was a photograph of, there was so much police brutality going on. There was a photograph of a woman who was protesting, and it was a hot day, and she had on a sports bra and a bare midriff and a skirt, and she's being held back by a bunch of policemen. And someone caught on their iPhone a photograph, and one of the cops is groping her. He's got his hand inside of the sports bra, and she's, screaming out. And it was, I don't know if any of you saw it, but it was a widely circulated photograph. Anyway, that moment appears in the poem. Occupied. Remaster, I got big sign, I amble off, face lit as skin of someone bathing. Young frayed hoods smell saltier. Police refuse the stairs. One gropes a breast under a sports bra. Historical pic. Crowd shoots all, then closes behind. Laptop. You sexy thing. Anti-crow, anti-crow, anti-crow sweeps the street, imperfectible. Police seem to have insatiable sexual appetites. Skyscraper bends over itself as if to bow or readjust. Then lighthouses, a tangerine rolling out of a tent is a real tangerine, and people are intemperate, out of air current, hot breath, and other waves of being, wherein each calls for the other, gives a sign. How to lift the limit between the body and the world. Birds cry, lovers die. Hermit can't eat the plastic. The sports bra snaps back, of great design. Vet of bones, all his brothers dead inside him, stops to pose with the lean of a milkman, smiles his truths of 1945. The policeman's hand is gone, imaginal, archetypal. The best messages are mutual and free from all ambition, like a wishbone. Hermit licks the wrapper. Steve Jobs, we're sorry you died. Images feel good taken into the human palm. How to back into our new instruments. How light November rain. Okay, and I will close by reading a poem called Begins. That's the last poem in the book, and it's a series of little short poems that are scattered across a couple of pages. My beloveds cannot unwire in time for dinner. Against these couches, these islands, they roam. The hallways blur. Nothing holds at this exposure. I didn't want my eyes to be my reality negator. Thick black plastic laid down over weeds, bewitched female mass. Spinoza tells us the animals walk solitary in the rain and do not question being whole. I cannot see, and it is irritating me. Memory reigns all over my family, Memory reigns all over my work. Slow cool of the ice in my cheek. I am ashamed that I would like to see inside the skull of my daughter and fix everything. I am ordinary and alone. A bosomy female figure appears behind the screen door, the smell of parrots. A ribbon falls from my daughter's hair onto her plastic town. In the big green and athletic fields, one could imagine a particularly rigorous amount of fucking. At my gate, the saturated, mildly hysterical birds of paradise stare one into the other. I am committed to the visual, though I like talking too, and wearing several pairs of glasses. That is like the description of a film. One pupil never sees the other, though both may shift and roam. Likewise, the dirt was fine, moist, and coal black, good to grow up, around, and in. The history came along unyielding and in ill repair, a system I walked but could not climb. I met uncertain people with untaught though fully absorbed vernaculars, a waft of baking on the sidewalks, on the porches, the cloudless simplicities. To stay the field, I strode my modern town hard into the falling rain. I was running really hard away as if to stumble forward. I was one big block shape. I was many folded into a sweater. I had a great desire to see myself now as a mother to that image and build further a humility of splendidness, a riot of spirit I could die into and leap toward and for in joy. If the middle range would have me now, would permit me a particularly Blakean protein lodged too deep in my psyche, and that's what is wrong with me. If when I look out, I am turning on that subjectivity, geodesic and unlikely, hungry the narcissistic ego would find a way to get out of the pathological books. I love dancing because it makes me feel strong and beautiful and made of muscle and air. It is a weedy, unmanicured trail. Kandinsky said an object was a narrative, and so he disapproved of it. De Kooning said you are with a group or movement because you cannot help it. I just wanted a church we could go to or stand in front of and beg to allow something to remain potential so the eyes wouldn't hate their little dictators. For one eye, a small Mesopotamian figure. For one eye, a big abstract. I look, and your face is like a part of speech not spoken, a tragedy so near its comic ash. One eye is my future, one eye my mausoleum. The divine in what is seen, in which we view only the shade of possibility. A semi-reluctant scribe, I read her book trembling. Scattered in every territory is one of the visibles this dispatch. Son, I wish you each euphoriant ephemerae. Everything ought to keep on going, I imagine my life. Thank you. Todd and I were going to do a brief Q&A, if y'all wanted to do that. Okay. The question is something about my writing process. With the election? Oh, okay. Well, for this book, I think that I don't have a plan of what I'm going to do when I start writing a new book, but I noticed that I was thinking a lot about the word peace, or the whole notion of it, and what it was, and largely it comes from teaching a lot of you, and looking at, realizing that I had been looking into faces of people who had been born into nonstop war and never been alive when we weren't actively engaged in war, whereas for myself there had been about almost 10 years between the Korean War and the Vietnam War. So that was part of the process, and then I knew I didn't want the book to be like a call to action for peace, and it was very uptight about the title of calling the book Peace, because it's like, peace, love, amen, kind of stuff. But there was a series of poems that I didn't read that are called that, and the book seemed, that was the title, and so that was just part of it. But the one thing I can say about the process is that I started to notice that a lot of oppositional stuff was going on, like there would be a line and then a line that would be pushing up against it, and that was particularly true in the Peace series, which I didn't read, and that was, there was a lot of like peace war, that kind of energy going on, so that I just, noticed that.
I think the visual things came more out of a sense of being able to have multiple readings. So like with the King and Queen, where it's sort of like you have these two things that are sort of separate entities, but then can be woven together. And then in some ways, the same way as works with the Rendezvous poems, when they have two columns, that you could read the columns separately from each other, or you can, when I read them tonight, I read them across. And I think that was just sort of, I was just curious to see where that works and where it doesn't. It's sort of, everything's sort of a little bit of an exploration, isn't it? It's sort of like, well, see it till it breaks down, or see if it works, and if it works, then sort of run with it for a while. That sort of thing. I think in terms of putting them together, it was more sort of, probably less thinking about them all together as a unit because of the visual, and more just sort of like the thematic. The Nautilus having the water and the astronauts and the traveling, and sort of Rendezvous has that same sort of traveling, and then with Rendezvous, with its interactions and its characters, that sort of brought in King and Queen. So those sort of things come together. I don't know, my experience is that some of it is also just intuitive. You just sort of like put things against each other and see if it shimmers or not, and see if you've got something.
It depends. It used to be, for me, it used to be pure language. It would just be playing with words, and then things would come out of that. And lately, it's expanded into other things. that sometimes an idea will happen. But even if there's an idea, I really try hard to not, what am I looking for? I try hard to not let the idea bully the rest of what's going to go on. And I try to attend to the material. Everybody, I mean, there's a lot of students, to attend to the materials and trust in them and let that work out. I'm fearful of, I think, well, I mean, there's a lot of people have said this. I don't know who said it first, but it's a good thing. But if there's no discovery for the poet, there's no discovery for the reader. So you have to, play this kind of game with your own work and let it evolve and not, try to get out of the way of it. But at the same time, you got to attend. So,
Something very similar. I don't think I really have sort of ideas. There's some people that are very good that they have things that they want to say in a poem or have an idea or an opinion, and I feel like I'm just continuing, what I'm good is not saying anything at all and continuing to say nothing at all over and over again. Because it's much more interesting to me about sort of the interactions, like, so if I've got a quote from, say, or language from Van Gogh, and I've got quotes from my own sort of email correspondence with somebody, and then I've got sort of Richard Dawkins in the back of my mind. It's just interesting how those sort of like they begin to sort of layer on top of each other and sort of begin to weave together for me, and it's just sort of through the exploration that it comes. I don't know, because I've seen all sort of ends of the spectrum too, because when I was sort of at one point when I was in a rough part of my life, all I could do was make lists of words. And so I was just making lists and lists and lists of words that I found interesting. And out of that, another series sort of crept out. So I don't know if there's, what is the saying? Like if there's spark or there's fire, you go with it. You follow that, and do it until it runs out. That's usually what I do.
That's Kathleen. Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't know what's going on. I've been writing some really long poems, and I revised. I don't even like the word revised. I just think of it as always writing. But I can, like, all last summer I wrote one poem. I wrote one 11-page poem, and and I gave it a lot of room and space, and that's all I worked on. And I don't know how. I'm interested in perception and consciousness, and so I want to let as much come in as possible. And so I think that's part of the length thing, But then there's also these really, in this book, there's also these really short little ones too. So there's both, but the long form is, and Todd writes on long forms too. You can move around a lot, and I don't know. There's something about if you're writing about perception and consciousness, there's something about the long form that lets a lot of play come in that way, and the poem lets it work itself out, rather than. I think one of the things that's kind of dangerous about poetry workshops is that there's the one-page poem, or maybe two, but really more often than not it's the one-page poem, and that's can be a problem, and that we should expand that out to, a much longer form. That's a good question. Do you want to start?
Think for that for a second.
So the question is the role of poetry? Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. 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 Do you have something to say?
Well, I don't know. I think it's somewhat the same process. I don't know if Gillian's talked about this in class, but I've heard that, writing is a form of reading and reading is a form of writing. So in sort of the reader and sort of taking the work into themselves, they're going through another entirely sort of additional process. So it isn't just sort of matter of you're passively sitting there and I'm giving you knowledge or experience or these things, but that you are involved in the process too, and that you are sort of, as I have synthesized things and images and words, you too are synthesizing sort of simultaneously. And I think the great thing about that, and maybe this is the scary thing that, we're brave enough to let other people see what we're writing, is it's another place for that expansion. Because sort of like, if it's just in my own head, then I'm sort of like, turning around in circles in my own mind. But if it gets out to other people, then sometimes there's that ability for that to try to come out of me and become something larger than that I don't see inside the work. And so like I'm in a couple writing groups, and so just that itself is wonderful, to have other people who are friends who understand your work, be able to see around it and see how it's much larger than sort of maybe what you think it is inside. It's still spooky to sort of have sort of like, I now have something to say and now I will read it to you. But at the same time, why not? If it's exciting to you, then perhaps it's exciting to other people, and you don't know until you share it.
Yeah. I don't think I really have anything to say that's any more important than anybody else has to say. And I'm suspicious of work that tries to do that. But I do think that poetry's role, or any art's role, is to expand consciousness and perception. And there's so much in our culture that tries to level us and dumb us down and make us all think the same way and control us, that art does have the potentiality of breaking through that in different ways. So I do think it has a social force in that way. But it's sort of an invisible one. Yeah. Caroline.
It's totally for me. I'm told if I don't write, I get cranky.
Yeah, yeah. Life is more interesting if you're writing. It gets boring otherwise, I think. But that whole question of audience is a tricky one, because if you're just writing for yourself, it could be, too closed in. But if you think you're writing for everyone else, then doesn't that sort of turn you into an authority? And I don't like authority. So, yeah. Huh?
Balance.
A balance, yeah. So I think we're done. Todd and I we have our books for sale out there, and we're having a fire sale today. You can get both of our books for $10. Today and today only. So we will be out there signing, and thank you so much for being such a nice, attentive audience, and thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.